Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are undertaking an exploration into the very blueprints of democracy for one-sixth of humanity, the Constitution of India.
And this isn't just any governing document. It is truly unique, and I think it's defined by its sheer ambition.
Ambition is the right word.
You have to picture it. The framers weren't just writing laws. They were trying to build a stable political system, from scratch for a newly independent, staggeringly diverse subcontinent that was just emerging from centuries of colonial rule.
And its chief architect, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he famously said that it was framed after they had ransacked all the known constitutions of the world.
Ransacked. He was proud of it, and that's the key.
Right. Ransacking, borrowing, synthesizing, whatever you call it. The result is this text full of fascinating paradoxes.
It really is. It's borrowed, but it's also strikingly original. It's rigid in some places, but then incredibly flexible in others.
Yeah, it's fundamentally federal, but with this strong sort of built-in unitary bias.
Exactly. So our deep dive today is all about distilling those core concepts, those characteristics that really define the text.
And we want to understand not just what the features are, but the critical political and historical choices the Constituent Assembly made and, why those choices still dictate daily life in India.
And we have to establish right away that we're not looking at a static document. The Indian Constitution is dynamic. It is constantly changing.
Okay, let's unpack that dynamism immediately. This power to amend is enormous.
It is. We're talking about a text that has undergone over 100 substantial amendments since 1949.
We've seen these major shifts driven by amendments like the 7th, the 44th, the 73rd, and 74th, which we'll get to.
The 101st, which brought in the goods and services tax framework. But the seismic event, the one that proved the sheer legislative power to alter the text, was the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976.
The mini-constitution.
That's the key example. That one single amendment was so sweeping, it touched upon the preamble, fundamental rights, the judiciary, the legislative structure, that it's universally known as the mini-constitution. It just demonstrates the vast power Parliament has.
So if Parliament has this incredible power to create a whole mini-constitution, what's the ultimate guardrail? I mean, what stops Parliament from just dissolving the core identity of the Republic through an amendment?
And that is precisely why the 1973 Kesavananda case is so crucial.
The basic structure doctrine.
Exactly. That landmark Supreme Court ruling established that Parliament's power to amend under Article 368 is not absolute. It cannot enable Parliament to alter or destroy what the court defines as the basic structure of the Constitution.
So things like judicial review, federalism,
secularism, democracy itself, these are protected. It's a fundamental, judicially imposed limitation that prevents the wholesale destruction of the document's core principles.
So that's the essential context for our deep dive. A document that's constantly evolving, yet at the same time protected from fundamental destruction by its own judiciary. It's an intellectual tightrope walk.
It is.
Okay, let's jump into the first defining characteristic, which is simply the scale of this project.
The scale is almost hard to comprehend.
When you look at constitutions globally, written ones like America's or unwritten like Britain's, the Indian Constitution just sits alone because of its sheer overwhelming length.
It is the lengthiest written constitution in the world, and it's renowned for being comprehensive, elaborate, and frankly, unbelievably detailed.
And the growth of the document itself kind of illustrates the difficulty of governing India.
It does. Let's look at the numbers.
Okay. Originally in 1949, it was already huge. A preamble, 395 articles in 22 parts, and 8 schedules. No one started bigger.
And today, well, that document has grown to a preamble, about 470 articles now, divided into 25 parts and 12 schedules.
That's a huge increase.
To put that growth in perspective, while about 20 articles and 1 part have been deleted over the years, roughly 95 articles, 4 new parts-like for municipalities and cooperatives, and 4 new schedules have been added. This is a text that's constantly being stitched and restitched.
Which brings us to the fundamental question of why. Why this vast elephantine size? Why couldn't they just write a concise, elegant document like the U.S. Constitution? Our sources point to 4 specific foundational factors.
Factor 1 is, it's obvious, but it's critical, geographical factors.
The sheer size and diversity.
Right. India is a subcontinent of staggering vastness and diversity. When you're writing a foundational text that has to provide stability for hundreds of distinct linguistic groups, countless castes, varying cultural norms, and huge economic disparities, Generic principles just won't cut it.
You need details.
You need detailed provisions to mediate disputes and ensure cohesion across a massive landmass.
Okay, factor 2 is the undeniable historical influence.
Yes, the framers were heavily shaped by the bulky Government of India Act of 1935. This colonial-era legislation was already an elaborate, weighty, and very administrative piece of work.
So they didn't start from a blank slate.
Not at all. When they began drafting, it just made practical sense to adopt the existing framework for administrative details. The skeleton of the 1935 Act was familiar, and it was ready-made, giving the new Constitution a weighty foundation of bureaucracy right from the start.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
They didn't have time to theorize about administration. They needed stability, fast.
Which is compounded by factor 3, the single constitution principle. In classical federations, states often have their own separate constitutions.
Right, reserving local details for those texts.
But the Indian text governs both the center and every single state. It defines not just the fundamental relationship between them, but the detailed administrative, legislative, and financial rules that apply across the board.
So it all has to live in one document.
It has to. And the final factor is one of personality and profession, the dominance of legal luminaries.
The Constituent Assembly was packed with lawyers.
Highly accomplished lawyers, legal scholars, constitutional experts. And this professional background led to a constitution that is just highly detailed and legalistic. They weren't satisfied with just laying down principles.
They included all the administrative provisions, too.
Exactly. Things that in countries like the UK or US will be left to ordinary, flexible legislation or just political convention. They put the rule book for bureaucracy, emergency procedures, public service commissions, all inside the foundational legal text.
This lawyerly desire for clarity, it ensured stability, but as we'll see later, it became a huge source of criticism.
A calculated risk, sacrificing brevity for stability in a deeply complex environment.
So let's talk about that ransacking process, how they drew from the world to create Feature 2. Drawn from various sources.
It was a very conscious, almost academic decision. They wanted to create a document that learned from global failures and institutional successes.
And the sources break the borrowings down into 3 main influential parts.
Right. The first, and you could argue it's the structural backbone, is the structural part.
Which we just mentioned, largely from the Government of India Act of 1935.
It provided the whole administrative machinery, the federal scheme, the judiciary structure, the role of governors, emergency powers, most of the administrative nuts and bolts. Our sources confirm that more than half of the Constitution's provisions are identical to or bear a close resemblance to that 1935 Act.
Then you have the soul of the document, the philosophical part.
Yes, this sets the nation's ethos. The fundamental rights, the promise of enforceable liberties, were inspired by the American Constitution.
And at the same time, the blueprint for a welfare state, the directive principles of state policy.
Came directly from the Irish Constitution. And this is the synthesis in action. You're blending enforceable political rights with non-enforceable aspirational socioeconomic goals.
And finally, the political part, the mechanics of how the government actually functions day to day.
The principle of cabinet government and the detailed relationship between the executive and the legislature were largely drawn from the British Constitution and the Westminster model. It was already somewhat familiar to the educated elite.
But that wasn't all. They were really shopping around.
Oh, yes. They collected provisions from across the globe. The idea of a federation with a strong center from Canada.
Provisions on trade from Australia.
The suspension of fundamental rights during an emergency from Germany's Weimar Constitution. The procedure for amendment from South Africa. It was a truly global constitutional collage.
But one where every piece was, meticulously tailored for Indian conditions. They weren't simply copying.
We were curating. That's the perfect word.
Okay, so we've established the document's massive scale and its diverse ancestry. Let's move into the mechanics of governance, starting with the flexibility built into the legal text itself. Feature 3, the blend of rigidity and flexibility.
This blend is absolutely crucial for a country that's trying to balance core inviolable principles with the need for societal change.
Right. If it were too rigid, like the U.S. Constitution, it might just snap under pressure.
And if it were too flexible, like the UK's unwritten constitution, its core democratic principles could be easily dissolved. So India chose a synthesis.
And that synthesis is mainly detailed in Article 368. It outlines 2 specific procedures that require a special majority for amendment.
The first type requires a special majority of Parliament. To pass, an amendment has to be supported by 2 criteria at the same time. a two-thirds majority of the members of each house present and voting.
Plus, that number has to be a majority of the total membership of that house.
Which means the bill needs deep bipartisan support. You can't just sneak it through a sparsely attended session.
And the second type is even tougher. It's for provisions dealing with the federal structure.
Right, the relationship between the center and the states. This requires that same grueling special majority of Parliament. Plus, the amendment must then be ratified by the legislatures of at least half of the total number of states.
The significance of that can't be overstated.
No, it can't. By requiring state ratification, the framers make sure that the federal balance can't be unilaterally disturbed by the powerful center. It provides stability for the states.
But then, to prove the flexibility side of the blend, our sources remind us that vast portions of the Constitution can be amended simply by an ordinary legislative process.
Exactly. Just a simple majority of Parliament, like passing a regular law.
So what's the catch?
The technical detail that matters is this. These simple majority changes, things like admitting new states or changing the boundaries of existing states, do not fall under Article 368.
So they separated them out.
Yes. It highlights the framers' organizational genius. They reserved the high hurdles of Article 368 for truly foundational changes, but allowed routine adjustments through ordinary legislative means.
Building on that idea of controlled power, let's look at the structure that makes India so hard to classify Feature 4.
Yeah.
A federal system with unitary bias. This is the defining paradox.
It really is. If you just judge the structure by the book, India ticks all the classic boxes of a federation.
Two governments, division of powers, written constitution.
An independent judiciary, bicameralism. It looks federal.
But then you see this structural bias toward the center. I mean, why did critics immediately describe it as quasi-federal or having a centralizing tendency? Where does that unitary tilt come from?
It comes from features that were deliberately inserted to ensure national unity above regional autonomy. You see a strong center, the single constitution for everyone, single citizenship.
The integrated judiciary, the center appointing state governors.
And the All India services, plus, most critically, the emergency provisions, which can override state authority entirely.
And that structural imbalance is why the word federation is not used in the Constitution at all.
Correct. Article 1 describes India as a union of states.
What does that specific phrasing imply?
It implies that the Indian Federation was not formed by an agreement among sovereign states, which is the classical American model.
And more importantly.
And most crucially, it establishes that no state has the right to secede from the Union. This is integration by constitutional design, not some voluntary agreement you can just terminate.
That distinction forced experts to invent new terms for it. K.C. Ware called it quasi-federal.
Morris Jones labeled it bargaining federalism, emphasizing the constant political negotiations required.
And Granville Austin's description, cooperative federalism, suggests the states and center are constitutionally compelled to cooperate.
Right. All these terms just confirm that the framers prioritized national strength and unity over a perfect symmetrical federalism.
Okay, moving to Feature 5. The strategic choice of a parliamentary system over the presidential system. This was arguably the most crucial political decision.
They opted for the British parliamentary system, the Westminster model. It's a system defined by the close cooperation and coordination between the legislative parliament and the cabinet.
So the prime minister is the real executive, and the cabinet is responsible to the parliament.
Yes, and this is in direct philosophical contrast to the American presidential system, which is based on that rigid doctrine of separation of powers.
So why choose familiarity and cooperation over the revolutionary separation of powers?
It was partly historical. They were used to the Westminster model. But more importantly, the framers saw the need for greater responsibility in the executive. They believed that in a newly fractured society, an executive that's constantly accountable to the legislature was safer than a fixed-term, powerful presidential executive.
We see this choice established at both the center and in the states. The key characteristics are clear.
The nominal and real executives, majority party rule, collective responsibility, the leadership of the PM.
And the dissolution of the lower house.
But, and this is a vital nuance, while it's borrowed, the Indian system is not a clone of the British one. The Indian parliament is not sovereign.
Because of the written constitution and judicial review.
Exactly. And unlike Britain, India has an elected head of state, the president making India a republic, not a monarchy.
That distinction is important. And it leads us directly into Feature 6. The sophisticated synthesis of parliamentary sovereignty and judicial supremacy. This is where the competing interests of Parliament and the judiciary really meet.
The framers had to navigate two extremes here. You have the British model, where Parliament is virtually all-powerful, and the American model, where the Supreme Court, armed with due process of law, can strike down almost any legislation.
So India had to find a middle path.
A workable middle path. The synthesis means the Supreme Court uses judicial review to declare parliamentary laws unconstitutional, maintaining judicial supremacy.
But Parliament, via Article 368, maintains its power to amend the major portion of the Constitution, providing legislative sovereignty.
But the crucial insight here, and this gets to the core of the power balance, lies in the specific language used for judicial review. The U.S. uses the concept of due process of law.
Which is highly subjective. It lets the court challenge the fairness of a law.
Correct. But the Indian Constitution, specifically in Article 21, uses the phrase procedure established by law.
And that difference is enormous.
It is. By choosing procedure established by law, the framers initially intended to limit judicial review. The court's job was simply to check if the lawmaker followed the established procedure for passing a law, not necessarily to challenge the inherent merit of the law itself.
So by choosing that wording, they deliberately gave Parliament slightly more power than the U.S. system allows. It ensures judicial supremacy was tempered by legislative authority.
It's a foundational decision that really reinforces that synthesis.
Now we shift our deep dive from the structures of power to the pillars designed to protect and guide the citizen. We start with Feature 7, the integrated and independent judiciary.
The Indian system is unique because it's both integrated nationally and fiercely protected from political interference. The structure is a pyramid, Supreme Court at the top, high courts at the state level, and then a hierarchy of subordinate courts below them.
And the key functional distinction is that integration. In the U.S., you have separate federal and state courts for federal and state laws.
But India has a single system of courts that enforces both central laws and state laws across the whole country. This integration is another structural element designed to ensure the unity of the nation.
And that unity is protected by the sheer power of the Supreme Court, which acts as the guarantor of fundamental rights.
And the ultimate guardian of the Constitution. To ensure it could fulfill these monumental duties, its independence had to be legally enshrined.
And the framers were meticulous about that. Fixed service conditions, security of tenure for judges.
Charging the SC's expenses directly on the consolidated fund of India, meaning Parliament, can't hold the judiciary hostage by cutting its budget.
They even prohibited discussion of a judge's conduct in legislatures.
And they vested the SC with the power to punish for its own contempt. All these provisions create a kind of fortress of independence, which is necessary to allow the judiciary to be the ultimate check on the executive and legislature.
Next, we arrive at Feature 8, the fundamental rights, in Part 3. These are the promises of political democracy.
And limitations on executive tyranny. Their defining characteristic is that they are justiciable.
Meaning they are enforceable in a court of law.
Right. If any of these rights are violated, the aggrieved person has a guaranteed path to justice. They can go directly to the Supreme Court, which can issue specific writs habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, and so on.
The Constitution guarantees 6 specific categories of rights, including the crucial right to equality and the right to constitutional remedies itself.
Which Dr. Ambedkar called the heart and soul of the Constitution.
But, and we have to stress this, these rights are not absolute.
Not at all. They are subject to reasonable restrictions imposed by the state rights, have to be balanced against public order, morality, and security.
Plus, they can be curtailed by amendment and can be suspended during a national emergency.
With the crucial exception of Articles 20 and 21, even during the darkest times, the right to life remains protected.
That sets the stage perfectly for Feature 9, the philosophical counterpoint. The Directive Principles of State Policy, or DPSP. Dr. Ambedkar called these the novel feature of the Constitution.
If fundamental rights are about immediate political rights, DPSP are about promoting long-term social and economic democracy. They're about establishing a welfare state.
So they outline the socialistic, Gandhian, and liberal intellectual goals the state should strive for.
Things like securing equal pay, organizing village panchayats, promoting international peace, and securing a uniform civil code.
But isn't calling them fundamental to governance while making them non-enforceable just an elegant way of dodging accountability? Why make them non-justiciable?
That is the perpetual tension. The framers made them non-justiciable because in 1949, India simply lacked the financial and infrastructural resources to legally guarantee all these socioeconomic rights.
Making them enforceable would have bankrupted the new state.
or been impossible to implement, rendering the Constitution ineffective from day one. So their real force is political, not legal. They impose a moral obligation on the state.
So the idea is, a citizen can't sue the government for failing to provide a job, but the public can vote them out for failing to pursue those welfare goals.
Exactly. And that tension is by design. The Supreme Court recognized this in the Minerva Mills case in 1980, holding that the Constitution is founded on the bedrock of the balance between the fundamental rights and the directive principles.
Like two wheels of the democratic chariot.
The one providing immediate protection, the other providing future direction.
That brings us to Feature 10, the later edition designed to balance that equation, the fundamental duties. These were conspicuously absent from the original 1949 document.
Indeed. The framers originally believed that providing rights was sufficient, but this changed dramatically during the internal emergency of 1975-77.
And so the 42nd Amendment in 1976 introduced these duties based on the Swaran Singh Committee's recommendation.
Correct. They are housed in a new part, IVA. Their function is to serve as a crucial reminder to citizens that while they enjoy guaranteed rights, they also owe duties to the country, to society, and to their fellow citizens.
Things like respecting the Constitution, flag, and anthem, protecting the country's sovereignty, preserving our composite culture.
And an 86th Amendment in 2002 later added a duty for parents to provide educational opportunities to their children.
And crucially, like the DPSP, the duties are also non-justiciable.
Right. You won't face legal penalty for not following them, but they set a civic standard.
Our next set of features highlights elements that are specifically tailored to India's unique, complex social reality. We begin with one of the most debated and defining characteristics, Feature 11, a secular state.
The term secular was explicitly added to the preamble in 1976, but the spirit was already deeply ingrained. The core definition is that the Indian state does not uphold any particular religion as its official religion.
But the Indian model of secularism is fundamentally different from the one in many Western countries. We hear it referred to as a positive concept that contrasts with the Western negative concept. We need to explore this distinction.
The Western or negative concept generally implies a complete, impermeable separation of church and state. The state must be blind to religion.
But India, being multi-religious from the start, needed a different approach.
Exactly. The positive concept holds that the state must give equal respect to all religions, or more dynamically, protect all religions equally. This means the state is not against religion, it's neutral, and it can interact with and support religious institutions from different faiths to ensure equality.
Could you give us a concrete example of this positive interaction?
Sure. Think about religious pilgrimages. The state might contribute funding towards infrastructure for a Hindu pilgrimage, while at the same time offering subsidies for Hajj pilgrims or maintaining historical sites belonging to Sikh, Muslim, or Christian communities. It intervenes not to promote one religion, but to ensure equal freedom for all.
And this positive secular character is all over the Constitution. Article 15 on non-discrimination, Article 25 guaranteeing freedom of religion.
Article 30, which grants minorities the right to establish and administer educational institutions. And of course, the directive in Article 44 that pushes the state to secure a uniform civil code for all citizens.
It's a sophisticated, complex, and sometimes messy commitment to religious plurality rather than strict separation.
Precisely. And in pursuit of that equality, the Constitution abolished the old system of communal representation based on religion, replacing it with temporary reservations for scheduled castes and tribes based on historical disadvantage.
Next, let's look at Features 12 and 13, which define political inclusion and national unity, universal adult franchise, and single citizenship.
Universal adult franchise is the basis for all elections. Every citizen over 18 has the right to vote without discrimination. The voting age was lowered from 21 to 18 in 1989.
At the time, this was considered a monumental, almost reckless, bold experiment. I mean, the context was overwhelming. Vast poverty, overwhelming illiteracy, deep social inequality. Why did they take such a huge leap of faith?
They understood that to build a successful democracy, to give true legitimacy to the new republic, they had to involve everyone immediately. It was seen as the most powerful tool to instill self-respect in the common person and empower marginalized groups. It was a commitment to deep democracy from day one.
And coupled with this radical inclusion is Feature 13, single citizenship. Despite having a federal structure, India provides only for single Indian citizenship.
This is a deliberate choice for integration. Unlike the U.S., where you hold dual citizenship, national and state, in India, every citizen enjoys the same rights across the entire country, regardless of their state of residence.
The core purpose was to eliminate regionalism and forge a united, integrated nation.
The law dictates unity, even if, as the source material notes, the sociological reality of communal riots and caste wars often challenges that constitutional ideal. The law sets the goal.
Feature 14 details the independent bodies, the essential bulwarks of the democratic system that ensure integrity and accountability.
These are critical, non-majoritarian institutions, and their independence is secured through the same guarantees applied to the judiciary: security of tenure, fixed service conditions, and so on.
First, the Election Commission. Without this body, free and fair elections for parliament, state legislatures, and the president would be impossible.
Second, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, or CAG. The CAG is the guardian of the public purse. It audits the accounts of the central and state governments and comments not just on the legality of spending, but also on its propriety.
That's a key distinction.
It's fundamental to financial accountability. And third, you have the Union Public Service Commission, UPSC, and the State Public Service Commissions. They ensure a merit-based, non-political bureaucracy. These institutions are the backbone of stable administration.
Moving to feature 15, we address the unique power that defines the structure's elasticity, the emergency provisions.
These provisions allow the president to meet any extraordinary situation effectively, safeguarding the nation's sovereignty, unity, and security.
And the extraordinary aspect is the constitutional transformation that occurs.
Right. During an emergency, the central government becomes all-powerful. The system seamlessly converts from federal to a completely unitary one without needing a formal constitutional amendment. It's an inbuilt crisis management mechanism.
The three types are distinct. The national emergency under Article 352 is triggered by war, external aggression, or armed rebellion.
The state emergency, or president's rule, under Article 356, is invoked due to the failure of constitutional machinery in the states.
And finally, the financial emergency, Article 360, which thankfully has never been invoked.
And we conclude this section with the final, structurally transformative additions. Feature 16 is the three-tier government.
This is a radical departure from classical federalism, which only recognizes the center and states. The 73rd and 74th Amendments in 1992 added a third, grassroots layer.
The 73rd Amendment gave constitutional recognition to the panchayats, or rural local governments. The 74th Amendment did the same for municipalities, the urban local governments.
So this was a constitutional commitment to decentralization and grassroots democracy.
It fundamentally expanded the definition of governance in India. And finally, Feature 17 is the establishment of cooperative societies.
The 97th Amendment in 2011 granted constitutional status and protection to the cooperative sector.
This amendment made forming a cooperative society a fundamental right under Article 19. It also added a new directive principle to promote them and a new part to ensure they function democratically and professionally.
It recognizes the cooperative sector as a crucial player in economic development.
Exactly.
What an immense volume of detail and structural commitment. But as we pivot from the features themselves, we have to address the intense scrutiny they faced. Because a document this ambitious does not enter the world without controversy.
That's right. At the time of its adoption, the Constitution was subjected to intense criticism, often by its own members, and this tension reveals the fundamental trade-offs the framers had to make.
The most immediate challenge was criticism 1, the charge of borrowing. Critics didn't just see borrowing, they saw a failure of imagination. They called it a bag of borrowings, a hodgepodge, or just an unoriginal patchwork.
This is where Dr. Ambedkar's defense is so foundational and brilliant. He essentially challenged the critics, asking if anything truly new could be framed in constitutional law 100 years after the first written constitutions were drafted.
He argued the core principles are universal.
He said, given these facts, all constitutions and their main provisions must look similar. His defense was that the originality lies not in inventing new principles, but in the intelligent application and necessary modification of existing models, avoiding the faults of the original sources.
So they were prioritizing functional stability over theoretical novelty.
Absolutely. It was pragmatic and intelligent, not shameful.
The second major charge, criticism 2, was that it was a carbon copy of the 1935 Act. This was a more pointed critique about a lack of independence from India's immediate colonial past.
Critics like Sir Ivor Jennings observed that the Indian Constitution was textually a close copy, an amended version of that 1935 Act. Pierre Deshmukh said it was essentially the Government of India Act of 1935 with only adult franchise added.
And Ambedkar's response was characteristically frank.
He said, "I make no apologies. There is nothing to be ashamed of in borrowing." But he clarified the purpose, which is critical. He stated that the borrowed provisions mostly relate to the details of administration, the nuts and bolts of the bureaucratic machinery.
So they took a known administrative framework so they could dedicate their originality to the philosophical parts.
It's like fundamental rights and the DPSP, exactly.
Next, we have the ideological challenges, criticism 3. Un-Indian or anti-Indian.
Sure.
Critics felt this slavish imitation of the West made the text unsuitable for India's unique civilization.
K. Hanumanthaya lamented, "We wanted the music of veena or sitar, but here we have the music of an English band." This critique stems from prioritizing modern centralized institutions over traditional or indigenous structures.
Lokanath Misra called it a slavish surrender to the West. The fear was that this foreign framework would fail to resonate in the Indian environment.
Which feeds directly into criticism 4, an un-Gandhian constitution. Many believe the document failed utterly to reflect Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy.
Particularly regarding local governance. Critics argued the Constitution should have been raised upon the foundation of self-governing village panchayats, emphasizing radical decentralization.
This was seen as a betrayal of the national movement's ideals. And this critique remained potent for decades, though, as we discussed, the 73rd and 74th Amendments can be seen as a posthumous attempt to finally integrate that Gandhian ideal into the constitutional structure.
The fifth critique brings us back to the sheer volume, elephantine size, revisited.
Yeah.
This criticism focused not just on necessity, but on the burden of the text.
Sir Ivor Jennings felt the Constitution was, generally speaking, too long and complicated. And H.V. Kamath, a constituent assembly member, connected the size critique directly to the Assembly's emblem.
What did he say?
The emblem and the crest that we have selected for our Assembly is an elephant. It is perhaps in consonance with that our Constitution, too, is the bulkiest that the world has produced.
And finally, criticism 6, which speaks to the professionalism of the framers. Paradise of the lawyers.
This critiques the dense, convoluted, and highly legalistic language, making the document inaccessible to the common person. Sir Ivor Jennings famously termed the Indian Constitution a lawyer's paradise.
It sounds like the framers were so concerned with avoiding ambiguity that they created a document so technical only they could truly understand it. A massive job security plan for lawyers, perhaps.
Exactly. H.K. Mahazwari worried that this complexity would make people more litigious, fearing that the draft opens up vast avenues of litigation. Critics wanted a more accessible socio-political document, but the framers chose technical clarity, precision, and stability achieved through meticulous legal language over poetic simplicity.
What an incredible deep dive into the intellectual and political compromises that form the bedrock of Indian democracy. To synthesize everything.
Yeah.
The Constitution of India is the world's most detailed governing document, a masterful synthesis of global practices.
It took the efficient, responsible cabinet government from Britain, the enforceable fundamental rights from America, and the aspirational welfare goals from Ireland, and custom-tailored them for the world's most diverse nation.
And it's a text defined by necessary balancing acts.
We see that dual tension of fundamental rights set against the directive principle, the structure of a powerful federation with the built-in ability to function as a unitary state during crises,
and the constitutional mandate for national unity secured by single citizenship, all while accommodating profound regional diversity.
Understanding this document means understanding the deep intellectual work performed by its framers, the calculated choices they made to establish a robust legal framework intended to unify disparate groups and ensure stability for the long term.
However, we must end by connecting back to one of the stark realities we noted in the source material. Despite the constitutional goal of a united, integrated Indian nation, secured by provisions like single citizenship, the country persistently witnesses deep internal conflicts.
Communal riots, caste wars, linguistic clashes.
Which raises an important question for you, the learner, to mull over. If a supreme legal document, through its meticulously designed provisions, guarantees political unity and integration, can it truly succeed against deeply entrenched sociological and historical divisions?
And if the legal framework has done its job, what is the next layer of collective action or societal realization required beyond the legal text to achieve that cherished final goal of true national integration?